whatever. Okay, so I will repeat. This slide is a great opportunity to take your Android phone and scan the QR code to open the form for submitting talks. You can submit talks for any topic. We would be very happy to hear something about coroutines, Jetpack components, testing, but actually whatever you think is worth sharing with the community. So if you reach out, we are also offering support with public speaking if someone was interested. And we will post this presentation on Meetup. So if you need to come back to it, it will be a great chance. And now I'm giving the mic to Mario so that you can hear about some amazing ticket raffles for DroidCon.
Hey everyone. I also started the recording just now. If you feel unsafe with potentially your face being seen, please feel free to just not enable your camera. But let's go back to DroidCon. So DroidCon announced today the speaker lineup, and we are so excited that we thought like, hey, maybe we can also help us to get there together in person. So it's a developer conference here in the beautiful city Berlin. It will be hosted on October 20th to 22nd. It applies to the 2G rules, so only recovered and only fully vaccinated people are getting inside, and you can be one of them. So the easiest way is you pay by yourself, but if this is not an option, you can also ask Mario Bodemann if you can get a free ticket. How do you get a free ticket? You are a student, then we have one ticket for you through a connection through Google. We have 4 tickets free if you're willing to invest some time at our booth, where we'll be having like as GDG organizers presenting things, doing fun stuff with the other attendees, and all you need to do is like invest some amount of hours on this booth. How many hours is depend on how many people are actually signing up for booth duty. The more people, the less time you have to invest. And then additionally, we have we have 50% off for 10 people if you don't want to do either. If you're not a student, if you don't want to help at our booth, we still have 50% off for you. And now the question is like, how do you reach us? Best thing is to reach out to me, Mario Bodemann, or reach out to the Android community we have in general. This can either be through our Slack channel, which we will post in a second, again, how to reach our Slack, or you write me an email or reach me on Twitter or whatever. Thanks. I think that's the segment.
Okay, cool. Today we have 2 talks. The first one will be given by Maria, and she will tell us about reducing the traction when it comes to communication between teams and submitting tickets. So Maria, please, the stage is yours.
All right. Hello, everybody. Before I start my presentation, I just wanted to say I'm very happy to be here. I'm also a little bit nervous, but also I just wanted to put up front that right now I'm currently in Greece. I'm in Crete, and Crete has been experiencing some seismic activity since Monday. So if you see me that I have to rush out, it's because we're having a bit of a shake here. So I will probably get caught on camera rushing to a safe location. Hopefully it's not going to be the case. But just in case you see that I have to step out, is because we're having some seismic situation here. Hopefully nothing too terrible. But then on to more exciting, other than earthquake topics. I wanted to talk, yeah, I will take care. I wanted to talk about something that is probably a problem regularly within teams. So teams that have, of course, a development team and a specific team for testing, and it's the topic of communication and tickets failing. So let me share my screen to start the presentation.
Go on.
All right, so hold on, where are you here? All right, oh, can I see play here? Yes, I can. Can you see my screen well?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. So again, my name is Maria Gutierrez. I am the test lead at Gmondo. I've been working with them for something like 2.5 years, and I've been a QA for 13 years. Currently, most of my job goes around building teams from scratch or helping companies that have very little QA on them and supporting the testing needs that the engineers have. So it's not strictly about just writing tests, but helping around with processes and so on. So I actually wanted to talk to you about a process that we put together here at Gimondo, but also something that probably along the talk, you're going to realize that maybe you've seen this before with other names. And the idea of this process is to reduce features that fail during the development cycle. So you may have experienced situations where you finish a ticket, you finish a piece of development, and then it gets bounced back. And sometimes the communication is not great around that. And also you lose time. So there's a whole lot of situations going on there. And we decided to call this process pretty damn quick because that's the whole point of the process. So we now wrap it up as PDQ. And the idea is that it should be something that is easy enough to integrate into your processes and something that should also help you improve the communication amongst the team. So all of this is coming from a story, and our story and the story that I've lived in many other companies, and even as I'm interviewing with other companies as well, is frustration. So this is a very typical situation amongst QA team. So you have, as you know, the typical stereotype of the developer saying, oh, this works on my machine, or this wasn't part of the requirement, or this is not a bug, this is a beautiful feature. And then on the QA side, we have things like, it seems like the developers are not really testing their own code. And this is a reality that happens because sometimes teams are pushed to deliver because maybe we have inexperienced developers, maybe because we have a series of situations where it's just not possible to review the code or people are oblivious about doing this. And it's not great. This comes with the frustration. This breaks the team as well. So teams typically look like this. You would have a group of developers, a very small team of QAs, if there's any, and then you have a lonely pineapple here, which is the stakeholder. So what happens in these situations sometimes is that a lot of work gets processed, it gets thrown into the QA team, and we would like to think that we work in Agile, but sometimes Agile gets disguised as like a fancy waterfall, or even then our Agile processes are not mature enough, and then we end up putting a lot of strain on the QA team, and the QA team begins to burn. And then relationships get broken. So nobody's happy here. We become apples and pears, really. And then we have the lonely stakeholder here wondering what's going on. Then what we did was to take a step back and analyze the process that we had at that time, which looked a lot like after a requirement was being put together and we had a set of tickets, a developer would grab one of the tickets and then start a feature branch. So start the work on the feature branch, check. Then they will create a proven mergeable request. Of course, there's some peer review going on here. Maybe there is some automated tests if we're fancy like that. This could happen, of course, depending on how you're set up your development cycle and the automations that you have there. That's done. Then this developer will build the code for a test environment. If you have a test environment, check. And then we will move on to testing. Oh, hold on, I can't see here. And then we will move on to testing, but then the problem here is that if this fails, then we have to go all the way back to work on the feature branch. So we already have to spend time on creating another branch, on understanding what the problem is. Sometimes, and I've seen this many times, the QA doesn't really provide enough information, why the tickets failed, what happened with that feature. Then we start getting, again, this communication that breaks, where we have the requirement wasn't clear, or you didn't tell me what failed, or you didn't check your code. So then we have the situations amongst the team where not only the process seems a bit broken and off, but also the relationships amongst the team members are broken. So here we have this situation where the communication breaks because we have to, in this very waterfall way, we have to, again, start from the beginning, which is not ideal. So we tried to change the process and make it work in a different way with pretty much the same ingredients. So we decided to introduce this pretty damn quick process, which is basically a review between 3 people here. We have a developer, the QA, and a stakeholder. So by stakeholder, I also mean it can be someone from design. It can be someone from product. It can be someone from content. It really depends on what you're building. But we decided to just name this PDQ. So whenever a piece of development is ready to be reviewed, instead of just chugging it off to QA, we have all these people put together and they review the feature. So in probably other teams or in other companies, you will find this as some kind of triage, as 3 amigos, as many other names. But the important thing here is that it should be a meeting that is very short and very efficient, because we're going to take here acceptance criteria, basic design. So we're making sure that not just the specifications on the ticket are there, but that the design is also matching. If this is a ticket that has to do with design, of course, we're not going to go pixel perfect to check absolutely everything there. And we're checking for smoke. So, smoke tests. So we're going to make sure that we don't have any regression issues, so that the obvious things should still work. If you need to be logged in order to do something, that authentication should still work. If you need to click a CTA and go somewhere else, if you need to change screens or anything, that should still be there. So this is done. By the time that you've done this, you have your cat in the bag. Pretty much all the work that goes after this should be very smooth. So then you can create and merge your pull requests. Hold on, I can't see here. Yes, again. Here. Then we can build for test for the test environment that we have. Then we'll assign the ticket to the QA, the same QA with which you did the PDQ, because otherwise any other QA will be out of context. So the idea is that the person that reviewed that ticket at the PDQ stage also is going to test this ticket. So this is done. And then we're going to have our official testing phase. So at this point, you can do automated testing, you can do manual testing, you can do any other kind of testing. Maybe you can involve again a product owner, maybe you can involve any other stakeholder. And by the time that you're here, this should be wrapped up. So what does the PDQ do? It allows the developers to check their own work. And I can't stress enough in this part, because again, in many teams and in many companies, teams are pressured to deliver for whatever reasons. So we have deadlines, we have a business value that has to be addressed straight away. And sometimes there's just no time for this, or we become a bit oblivious about this. So this process, being very simple as it is, it allows developers to check their own work. It assists the QAs. This is specifically special when we have teams that, as I was showing you before, we have 10, 15 developers and a ratio of only 2 QAs, if any QA. Sometimes the people who do the QA are not even QAs. Maybe we have a stakeholder, maybe we have a product owner that is doing the QA. So in this case, it really helps to narrow down the amount of issues that can potentially happen. We delight the stakeholders. So that little pineapple there is very happy to be around, because they are actually receiving the value that they projected on the development concept. And it definitely improves the communication across the team. So we no longer have this division of developers against QAs, developers and QAs against stakeholders, product owners not understanding what's going on with the product, the team not really understanding why things are being stuck on QA or why things take too long to be developed, because these conversations are happening before even you close a pull request or you build the actual application to be tested. It definitely saves time. And I think that is the big pro, apart from the communication side. So how do you do this, a PDQ? PDQ should be a very short showcase. 10 and 15 minutes is tops. Ideally, you already have your environment ready. If you have to show this in some kind of emulator, you should have your emulator ready. You're prepared to do the PDQ, and then QA should also be available in order to jump into this. You can also do it with screenshots. We find this very helpful when we have to test tickets for TV. So we have a TV application at Gmondo. We have 2 TV applications. And sometimes it's hard to use an emulator for this case. Sometimes we don't even need it. Maybe we're just reviewing a very short piece in terms of design. And we have a dedicated PDQ Slack channel, but this is also something that actually came afterwards. We started doing PDQs. We started doing PDQs in a very organic way. And then the team realized that it was probably best to have a dedicated channel to address all the PDQs. So that way, as QAs, we know that when that notification is glowing, someone needs to get work reviewed. So then we know exactly who has been picking the last PDQs and who should be able to jump in. So what do we PDQ? So we PDQ testable pieces of work. That means that if this is work that can be already reviewed, so that this is actually done, development is done or considered as done. Of course, the definition of done can change, but by done here, I mean that the development per se has been finished. So you finish doing the acceptance criteria, maybe you wrote some tests as well, so that's ready to be reviewed. In some cases, maybe you want to already have a PDQ before you finish, because maybe you're unsure, or maybe you want to have some input from QA earlier on. So I guess you might have heard as well about shifting left, moving left, which involves QAs jumping in ahead, closer and closer to the development phase. So this could also be a possibility. And then sometimes we don't need to do PDQs. We've agreed, particularly with our team at Gimondo, that if a bug doesn't need to be PDQ'd because it's a very simple piece of work, maybe we just need to fix a button, maybe we just need to change some text, maybe something that is very, very specific that we all understand what it's about. We don't need to PDQ. Or sometimes it's work that is about consuming an API and maybe the user is not going to notice the change. Maybe these are changes that have to do with refactoring, and also this is not going to take an impact on the user. We don't even need to do a regression. In these cases, we decide to close the ticket straight away. So all of these little processes are very specific for us, but this is also something that you can discuss with your team. It doesn't necessarily need to be exactly like this. Of course, this is just a very rough guideline. These are agreements that you would need to get on with your team. What it isn't a PDQ. So a PDQ is not an actual functional testing session. So we are not going to test the whole feature here because, of course, this is developers' time, this is QA's time, and we might also have a stakeholder here. So we don't want to prolong this too much. As I was saying before, we might want to do 10, 15 minutes. So here we just go for the very basic things, and that's it. This is also not a full-on design review. Here, we're not going to check pixel perfect designs. We're not going to make sure that this is exactly the color that we were looking for, because probably the design side might be reviewed also by someone from the design team. So this is probably not the best time to do it. Of course, we need to make sure that the designs that were provided as part of the specification are there, but we're not looking to do a very thorough review of the design. Now, this particular bit was actually put together by one of the developers that worked with us by putting together the PDQ process. And he called this the anti-embarrassment tips for developers. So one of the important things is to keep your pull request open in case that you need to do any changes. That way you don't have to go and open another pull request. And for sure, check the acceptance criteria before you jump into a PDQ. That way, you know that all your acceptance criteria is there. You're not missing anything. You're not going to get into the awkward situation where you're going through all your PDQ, and then you realize you missed something that it was very obvious, and then you have to go back again and complete that. If you can test on a real device, that would be ideal. Of course, as you may already know, working in Android, sometimes the way that things look and behave on an emulator is not exactly how it looks like on a real device. So if you have the possibility to test on a real device locally, for me, that's the best way to go. But of course, it really depends on the devices that you have and how much time you have. If you have the time, test some edge cases. So try to work it around a little bit, so that way by the time that you pass it on to QA, it should be a breeze. So again, we're testing earlier. And if you want to have a checklist, some people work with checklists, some people, they don't necessarily need to have it. Have a checklist and make sure that you have all your ducks aligned. This way, by the time that you're done with your PDQ and you have your whole process nicely oiled, you will notice that not only you have less defects and you have a team that communicates better, you have a whole team. So you have a more homogenic team, a team that actually understand what is the value of each other's input. So in this case, a QA doesn't feel like it's getting things thrown on their plate, which is very common. A developer wouldn't feel like the work is just getting randomly bounced back with no reason. The QA is just fishing for bugs. And the stakeholder will really understand what is the value that the team is bringing, why things take too long, why things really need to be tested, what is the value of understanding an estimation, for example. A PDQ process is an agreement, and this is very important to understand. We are working together, so we don't want to impose. So we are not going to impose what I think is the best. This is a conversation. And it's also not finger pointing. So if things don't work out in the PDQ, of course, nobody's going to say, oh, you did a terrible work, or you just don't read your specifications, or why did this take so long? So we're just going to burn all of that, forget about the finger pointing, and this is about working together. When we came up with the idea of the PDQs, we realized that rolling out the process like this, which involves adding what some people would consider one more meeting on top of all the other meetings that we already have, it's difficult. Some people may push back. Some people may think that it's unnecessary to do all of this, everything's working fine. So my suggestions here for this are that you find team members amongst your team that you can rely on, that these are allies, people that you know that are willing to try new things, that they're probably someone that they're open to try out new things. And I'm sure if you think about your team, you already kind of pinpoint the people that you could probably test this with. So you can find QAs, developers, product, and design people to do this. So you put a little team together and you pitch the idea, which is what we did at Gimondo. So we grab a few people we have two cross-functional teams. We grab people from both cross-functional teams and we pitch the idea. Then we started to document what we would like to be the process like, because otherwise it's everybody's go. We had actually initially a Google Docs document, and then we moved this into an actual Confluence document after we officially started the process. And then we tested it. So we rolled the process out on one of the teams initially. So we have, within our cross-functional teams, we have, of course, multiple parts of guilds. So we rolled it out only for one particular guild amongst one of the cross-functional teams. Once we noticed this was working, we decided to roll it out for the whole team. We changed some parts of the process, and then we rolled it out for the rest of the team, so for the other cross-functional team. And it took some time to get some acceptance, but not too long. Actually, it might have taken us probably 1.5 sprints, 2 sprints, and these are sprints of 2 weeks. So roughly, it took us a month to adjust to the new process. Now, the big question is, did it work? For us, it definitely did. Unfortunately, by the time that we started doing PDQs, I didn't really have actual graphs of how many tickets we were bouncing back, but I can assure you every retrospective had that comment. What I can show you is how things have been looking for us during 2021. So by June, so we rolled the process in February. By June, we were already having pretty much this. So we had, this is the combination of both teams. Of course, the amount of tickets and the complexity is not necessarily reflected here. So we have 134 for 2 teams, but some things might have been taken out or in. We also don't have here the complexity, but statistically speaking, we have very, very few tickets that have failed. We also decided to split the tickets into types of failures. Sorry, the failures for tickets failing, we split them up so that way we could understand, okay, when a ticket fails, was it because of acceptance criteria? Was it because it was a regression issue, or because it really is failing on a specific device or a setup? So that way we can also measure this outside of the sprint. So we can say, out of these, 5 tickets that failed, 3 were because of this, and then we can dig in a little bit more into the reason. And by September, so this is information that I gathered from our previous sprint, which was a smaller sprint. And you'll see here, we have less tickets for both teams as well. And we didn't have any ticket failure. And this is a situation that we had while I run the team. I was on holidays. So we didn't have someone, saying, please, how this is possible, things are not failing or things are failing too much. And we have developers that also didn't require any kind of, supervision or anything in terms of how are you testing your things. And we had actually a product team that is running a couple of pretty packed projects completely on board. So this is really working out for us. It really required some goodwill from the team and some organization. So you really need someone to help you drive the process and people who can align with that vision. And that's it, really. So I hope this was somehow insightful for you. It definitely changed the way that we do development at Gmondo. We stopped having bad comments and toxicity between QAs and developers. Definitely, we have our QAs fully integrated within both cross-functional teams. And everybody loves a PDQ to the point that they actually associated the word with pedicure. So now the official emoji for this is like feet. So every time someone needs a pedicure, they just put a feet emoji, and then we know that they need a pedicure. But of course, we have our Slack channel for this, so we keep track of all the work. So that's it. I don't know if you have any questions or if you want to have the questions at the end of the whole meetup.
Thank you, Maria, for this insightful talk. I'm looking forward to hear about the stats for the upcoming months. So please update us. Do we have any questions? Look into directs, please. Okay, who is handling the direct questions?
What is the direct question? Sorry.
Maybe direct messages. Maybe you got a direct message, Maria.
I'm checking, but
maybe also Alex.
Maria, not Maria.
The other one, yes, that's fine.
Okay. It's like I don't see anything.
I also didn't see any questions, but maybe Alex, you can ask your question directly in case you feel up to it.
Maria, maybe you have a direct question in the chat. Oh, does this approach release this completely from reviewing from acceptance criteria and design point of view?
Release devs. Oh, hold on. Yeah, my connection is a bit strange. Release devs completely from reviewing from acceptance criteria and design point of view. Can you explain what you mean by release?
So probably when we do like a pull request review, like you should go into there and check it on your own and then only approve.
No, so peer reviews in terms of code, that still happens. So sometimes we do have PDQs while peers are reviewing the code. So it could be that a pull request still needs to go through some refactoring changes or some code changes specifically, but not in terms of the actual acceptance criteria. So it doesn't necessarily free you from doing a peer review for a pull request. And again, this really depends on what your process is internally. In some teams, you need to reviews. In some teams, maybe you have the authority to just merge whatever you want to merge, whatever you want to merge. But in this specific case for us, the code reviews still happen. It could be that you finish the PDQ, but there are some changes that still need to be done. And it becomes, it's at the developer's discretion to decide whether they want to do the PDQ again or not, because they know exactly what they touched. So if they know that no functionality was impacted, then we don't need to go through the PDQ process again. Sometimes tickets do fail after PDQs. And in this case, we also decide whether we want to have the PDQ again or not, because maybe it's a very specific thing that failed. There's a dance, but can we reduce? When does a ticket classify as failed? Can you elaborate on the acceptance criteria and other factors? Yeah, so a ticket is failed when acceptance criteria doesn't pass, when maybe acceptance criteria is there, but it fails for any specific reason. So it could be that, let's say that you're introducing a search that is going to give you back a few results, and the results should be displayed in a specific way. And you're getting the results, but it's crashing the application. So that's definitely a regression issue. Something that you introduce is failing is breaking the application. So we consider this ticket as failed because it's breaking the existing application. And again, it really depends on the processes that you have, because it could be that you decide to move the ticket forward and continue with the work, and then you address the bug separately. You open a bug and you know exactly, okay, it's crashing because of this, and it has nothing to do with the implementation, and you can go on. It could be as well that the ticket even fails at the PDQ stage, where during the demo that the developer is doing, we notice that there's something detrimentally wrong, and then we shoot back again to having the pull request open and making the changes. I don't know if that actually answered the question to Toby. I guess, yeah. If anything, just let me know. For Dinorah, how big your team is right now? We have 22 developers and we have 3 QAs right now. We have the 2 cross-functional teams. So we have 1 QA dedicated for each team. I fly around places, and we're actually hiring 1 more QA that is going to be specialized for 1 application only. So we actually have 1 dedicated for Android, 1 dedicated for iOS, which is the person that is coming. We have another person dedicated to overview both teams, and I lead the team. So we all kind of jump in independently, but each person has their own specialty, so to speak. Are you actually looking at the code in a PDQ session? You can. It really depends, because, for example, in a specific case, we have to release campaigns every now and then. So Gmondo is an application for exercising at home. And sometimes we have promotions or specific campaigns addressed to specific targets or whatnot. And sometimes we do need to check within the code that some parameters are being passed correctly. So that is something that, for example, product would need to make sure that you're passing the right thing. And then the developer can say, listen, this is a pull request and this is what is actually there. That part can also be reviewed as part of the pull request as a peer review session that you have separately. But again, it's also something that can be at the discretion of the developer. And again, a PDQ is not necessarily a blanket for all the cases. So this is where you start tailoring what is it best for your needs. And I think that's it.
Awesome, thank you. Then if there are any questions more, maybe you can ask them in the chat or below the meetup. And now I will continue to screen share and proceed with the meetup. Do we have any community announcements? Maybe you need some support on some project or want to find out about anything? Then it would be a good time to unmute and tell your case. And we can continue with recording, and we are also very happy to welcome Dinorah presenting us ways of safe ways of collecting flow in the UI. So Dinorah, do you have a presentation?
Yes, I do. How are you guys? Just give me 1 second. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. It's just quite we don't use Zoom in the office, so this is always so complex with this one. Do you see my screen?
Yes, and we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. I don't know what is this. I think I have to move this to here so you cannot see it and does not interference with the talk. Okay, great. My name is Dinorah. I'm a mobile engineer and also Google developer expert on Android. And today we're gonna talking about one of my favorite topics, that is about lifecycle owners. And we know lifecycle is quite important on Android development. Lifecycle means everything, and when I say everything, I'm quite honest. When we are talking about lifecycle, we are not only talking about your activity or one specific fragment. We are talking about all your application, right? So your general application usually has an activity, maybe has some fragments. Some people don't use it. I don't blame them. And some classes, right? Maybe you have something that is observing your network connection, or maybe you have some classes that connects to Bluetooth, or maybe something else. So when you are talking about life cycle, you are talking about multiple objects and multiple things that you need to be very aware. You need to be quite concerned of how these life cycles are working between each other, and you need to make sure that your application is doing a good performance job. Life cycle involves a good use of CPU for your memory, from your RAM, for etc. That is between performance. So today we're going to be talking about that, and we're gonna go and jump ahead with that life cycle. The word life cycle depends of many things. It depends of the life cycle, like the proper event that is happening at the moment, and the owner that has that life cycle, right? So what do you mean a life cycle? A life cycle, it means that we have a stage, then we have a state and events. I'm going to go a little deeper on this explanation, but at the end of the day, you're going to have these states and these events that are going to be involved in all the process that we have in our fragments and our activities. And obviously we need to have this stage and these events attached to an owner, someone that knows and can address what are they, right? This lifecycle owner has many functions and many processes that are involved. So we are going to be talking a little about all of them. They are quite cool. They resolve a lot of things that we might need to do when we are doing an activity. Maybe we want to maybe understand how on resume and on post process is working. The lifecycle owner is going to tell us which owner belongs which stage, and I think that's really cool. That's really cool. It will give us a lot of potential when we are building our applications. So let's jump ahead a little bit. Let's talk about the states. States pretty much are little points in a graph. Every point in this graph you are usually already know them. It's on create, it's destroyed. Is exactly the point of the operation. It's not the road to the state. Is the point. So you can track every state that is happening in your activities or your fragments when you are working with them. And for the events is how you go from one state to another. Is the path that you are joining. So they are como the edges. You know them as on create, on resume, on start, on pause. You can address them. You can use it. They can be used in custom components, and they give you the chance to use it to make some changes. Maybe you want to address, you want to make sure that something happened in some specific event. Maybe you want to dismiss a dialogue every time it goes on pause, or maybe something like that. That can be dangerous, so be careful there. But it's just an example. You can use these events to make sure that is happening. Events can be used in regular classes, and I know it's going to be some kind of weird because it helps you to track, for example, on resume and on pause. It can help you to track the network state, maybe a lot of observables that you might want to have in your application. And this is quite an example. I'm going to talk about something that is called Process Lifecycle Owner. The Process Lifecycle Owner is it's pretty much the owner of all the life cycles of all your application. It gives you insights about where are we in our application, not in activity, not in a fragment, it's the whole application process. Imagine you are using maybe an application of from a bank, or maybe an application for crypto or something like that, that you need to be extra safe. Imagine you are doing your things in your application and maybe you go to another application. When you get back to this original application that might have some security concerns, you can ask again for maybe a biometric or maybe a password or a multi-factor authentication. And you need to be very aware when the user change from on resume, that is the moment that your user is using your application, or moving to another application, maybe he's answering a phone call or everything between, and it can happen in all your activities in all your fragments. So a couple of years ago, people were trying to track all the on resume and on pauses of all your application, like all the time. Every time you move from one fragment to another, you make some changes in your main application, and at the end of the day, you ended up tracking like your whole situation, like every fragment, every dialogue, every activity. That was a mess, but I have a solution for that, and this involves Process Lifecycle Owner. You ended up having something like this, an activity and multiple fragments, maybe dialogues. So when you want to try to do this, you can create a little class that is then Lifecycle Observer, and you will be able to understand when your application is starting and when your application is it's going on a stop. This will give you the chance to understand when your application is it's in the stage of resuming, and when your application is moving to a secondary moment in your phone life cycle. So you can use the events that we were talking later at the beginning of this talk to understand what is happening in here. So you can start using these little annotations that exist, that is called on Lifecycle Event, and you just need to select the event you want to address, and you will understand when your app is resumed and when your app will go to the background. Even if you have multiple fragments, or even if you have multiple activities, these events will be only executed once your application is moved, is starting, when it's destroyed, and obviously when your user is changing applications, maybe answering the phone, opening Facebook, opening Instagram, and things like that, you will notice these changes in this Lifecycle Observer. So now that you have this little class, you only need to add this code to your application class that use Process Lifecycle Owner. It will give you the access to this huge life cycle, and you will address the owner as your application. And you just need to add the observer, and you are ready to go. No more need to go. No more. You don't need more code in your fragments or your activities to keep tracking of the resume and on stop events or the on pause, etc., etc., etc. You only need this. And if you can use these events for this minor inconvenience that we usually have when we are Android developers and we want to keep track of this stage, you can start using these annotations to make sure that everything is in the correct way. Okay, so if you want to know more about this, I have a blog post that you can find in my Medium account that is called Foreground and Background, and give you all the insights of how to start using it. It was graded a while ago, but it's still working. So you can go ahead and jump, give it a read, and let me know what you think. If you have any problems, please send me a message, and I will answer all your questions. So let's get back to life cycles, right? So we were talking about life cycles, and the life cycle that are or states and or events, and the lifecycle owner that it involves all the other functions and all the other function and variables that consume the life cycle variables that are state and events. Okay, so let's talk about a little bit about lifecycle owner. It gives you, okay. The lifecycle owner, pretty much it gives you, it's a default thing that you have in your fragments on activities. It's a variable that already exists. For the example, for the activities is you only need to call this. For fragments, you need to make sure that you are asking for the right lifecycle owner. It gives you the pretty much the owner of that element, of that view, of that activity. It gives you the owner of that, the owner of the life cycle, and it makes sure that is dismissed when the time is right and is created when the time is right. You can do a setup, but usually you don't need it. For example, the fragment. This is what is going on inside the fragment, right? So once the fragment is created, the fragment starts a process of initialization. And inside the initialization of the life cycle, we make a registry of this life cycle. So we make sure that this new fragment created, the life cycle just get addressed to that fragment. So it's pretty much joined. Now we have a view 3 lifecycle owner that it's just the view setting up the life cycle. Once you create like the UI, the XML, or the code that is your UI, and it pretty much what it does is that it reports the life cycle to the view. It makes sure that everything is going well in here, and it's just creating and adjusting the life cycle. And it says, okay, once this view is removed, the life cycle should be removed too. It has an store owner because you might want to have some ancestors on your view model store owner, because if you are using view model in your architecture, you need to make sure that this view model might be attached to this fragment. Because you need to make sure that this is stored and that everything is just addressing of the elements. When you have this, you might want to address make sure that you are addressing the save state register owner. That is only a way to tell them that when this view goes to uncreate again, after maybe going to a stop on pause, it might be recreated too, and just make sure that this life cycle just join together again. Okay, so this is quite cool. You can find this on the documentation of the fragment. I know it's a huge class, but it has this. I promise, between all the things that is happening on the fragment class, this is something that is being addressed. Pretty much it ties everything. It ties the view, the life cycle, and the fragment, and make sure that everything is tied together and everything responds to the same life cycle owner. That nothing is addressing maybe other fragments of other things that it might be just broken, right? So this makes sure that everything is quite tight and bound together. So a couple of years ago, everybody was using live data. I think a lot of people are still using live data, especially because when Kotlin was adopted, flows didn't exist. So no one knew how to push data and emit data like continuously to the UI. So everybody was using live data, and I'm not saying live data is wrong or that flows. You should be using flows. It depends on what you want to do. Live data are incredible good. live data give you the chance to observe. Live data give you the chance to observe an element on your view model, and you can observe these elements and the changes of your elements. And usually, this you can start collecting in your activities on your fragments on started on resume, and they are quite cool. They work, isn't it? You need to give them only the lifecycle owner. In this case, is this, because maybe this is an activity. But if you are using a live data that is maybe in your view model.loading, this observe in a fragment should call the lifecycle owner that belongs to a fragment. It cannot call this specifically, and need to make sure that you are addressing the fragment, right? So this was cool, no? This was actually a very clean and simple approach, but things has changed. If you go to the observe class that is on your live data, you will find some, I don't want to say weird things, but things that you need to be aware of. For example, the live data needs to make sure that it's running on the main thread. It has even an assertion that is assert on main thread. If this is not running on the main thread, it will not pass this assertion, and this function will not continue. It has also, it makes sure that if the current stage of the life cycle, it goes to the owner that you send to them, and it goes to the life cycle and asks them, hey, where are you? If the current state of the life cycle it's undestroyed, it will just not observe anything. It will just ask for a return. Everything else is just adding the life cycle. It's adding the live data to the life cycle to make sure that we can be observed, and pretty much that's what it does. It makes sure that it's not already existing, if it's not attached, etc., etc. I think that's you can find this in the documentation too. But the really important part is this last line. This little line is adding to the owner, depending the life cycle, this observer. Okay, so it's quite bound to the life cycle. Live data is attached to Android, but it's also attached to the to the life cycle of the application, of the activity or the fragment, right? Okay, this is cool. I know it's cool, but I don't know if we want to have a live data that is highly bound to the main thread. There is no concept of suspension. It pushes a lot of data all the time. It's quite attached to Android. Live data, if you remember, live data is something that belongs on Jetpack, on all the libraries on Jetpack. I don't know if I want to have maybe code of live data in my use cases, for example. It depends. It's just a matter of taste. But it's in my opinion, it's quite attached to Android. And well, the difficult concern here of live data is that the collection is quite attached to high-level components like activities, fragments, dialogues. So if you are in another activity, that is might not be, maybe if you are into fragments and you are moving from fragment A to fragment B, and the fragment A has a live data that is sending multiple info, when this live data moves to a suspend function, it might try to still send in this information. It might be not able to show the information till you return to that fragment, to the first fragment, but it might want to try to keep sending that. And that means that you are consuming memory even when you are not using it. So live data becomes quite a problem if you start seeing it on the light of the performance and the CPU use. So I don't know, everybody, I think live data solves a lot of problems. I think once you think about the architectural process, you might end up with something like this, right? You have maybe you have a repository, depends on your architecture, but you ended up having some repositories, maybe some view models, and maybe something on the UI. For the repositories, you ended up using only Kotlin code. If you have an application in Kotlin, obviously. You ended up having your repository with only Kotlin code, and if you are using like that, you ended up having your view models with Android code that is only Android code, or maybe is framework related. And some parts, some persons start using flows on your repository, but once they reach the view model, they ended up changing these flows to a live data. And you ended up thinking, why not continue using flows? You can use flows, right? Flows are pretty much are created to do that, to start streaming data, sending data, emitting data to your view. So why can I have to do this change? Well, and there was another problem, right? Every time you try to do a live data that you ended up want to have just one emission, you ended up doing something like this. You ended up having to track you need to end up tracking when the events is getting consumed. So you ended up doing something like this, like live data with an event to be pushed just one time, because if you don't do that, you ended up pushing all the time. Every time your live data see that you are on resume again, is gonna push the result. Well, it ended up being a mess. This was the solution we ended up having on the place I work. We start doing an event. In this event, ended up having an event observer. And every time this observer was handled, we just ended up removing the live data and the result of the live data. Well, it works, but it should not be this complicated, guys. So it should be simple. So flows were announced a couple of years ago, and everybody was thinking, we need to start using in our repositories, we need to start using flows, and maybe we need to start using it on our views too, in our activities and our fragments. So flows solves a lot of problems on the architectural side. You ended up having something that you can end up sending from repositories to your view models, to your UI, right? So you ended up having a full collection of sending this data just in one simple way. But there was a problem. The collection of the flows in the UI, it's quite complex. It can end up having some troubles, especially with consumption of the CPU, with consumption of your memory. And if you're not doing it right, and this talk is for that. If you ended up not doing right, if you ended up not doing it correctly, you can start leaking your flows into your views. And if you start doing that, well, we have a problem, right? Because who wants a memory leak? Probably no one. So there is a situation, the flows doesn't have a flow.value. You cannot extract directly the value of the flow. You need to make sure to collect this flow, because it's emitting multiple values, and you want to make sure that you are collecting all these values, not just one, right? So, and the other thing that was missing on the flow is that flow is not aware of the life cycles, because it's not attached to Android. So you can pretty much, flows belongs to Kotlin, doesn't belong to Android framework. So the things were getting complex in there, but there is a solution. And the solution is called Stateflow and SharedFlow. And these flows solve a tons of problems. And I want to say they are two different flows, but actually they are only one, and the other one is just a holder of the first one. And I want to tell you why. The first one is SharedFlow. SharedFlow is a type of a hot flow. It gives you a chance to emit to all the collectors that are hearing. You can repeat the stage of the SharedFlow and can exist without collectors. So you can emit all the time. And till you have a collector is when it start pushing this data. And you can have, for example, things like a replay of the cache that you might be using before the collections. And the other one is a Stateflow. A Stateflow is, I don't know if I can say that is a hot flow, because actually what it does, what it really is that a Stateflow is a SharedFlow that is a read-only state. So pretty much it's the same, but it's just a holder of the SharedFlow, and it has some other details, can exist without collectors because it has all the properties of a SharedFlow, and has conflated values, so it's always emitting. The thing about SharedFlow and Stateflow is that they ended up having some problems with the collection. When you ended up having this type of flows, you ended up having a view model. This view model do a push of the emission to your activity, and your activity should be collecting the things that are going to happen in there, right? So if the Stateflow and the SharedFlow are not lifecycle aware, your activity can start leaking if you are doing a poor collection of your flow. Even if you are using SharedFlow and Stateflow, you need to be very careful there. So the thing is that there is a solution for this. You usually end up having something like this. Maybe you have a little mutable Stateflow that has an state that maybe is false. For example, for this example, it's only a loading. It throws a loading and it tells you that maybe you are hiding your progress indicator, and every time it's executed, your activity will do something with it, right? You have this mutable Stateflow, and in your activity, you ended up having maybe something like this. You need to have a coroutine scope that might be tied to your lifecycle owner, and it might be aware when it's destroyed, because if we don't tell them when it's destroyed, the collection will not stop. And well, you know how it goes in there. We have a reg Java as a remembrance of the problems we have if we don't remove the collections. So the collections ended up something like this, right? You have a function that might have a lifecycle scope. You launch the scope of the coroutine, and you ended up doing something like that. And you go and call your Stateflow or your SharedFlow, that is viewModel.UI_state, and you do a collection. Inside this collection, inside this Lambda function, you start collecting your flow. This makes sure that you are now lifecycle awareness. It kind of does the trick. It kind of does the trick. It's not quite good, and I'm gonna tell you why. This only works half the times. If you have a buffer, a conflated, a flow node, or a sharing, maybe something more complex in your SharedFlow, this might be leaking. And you might ended up doing something like this. You maybe remember this kind of code that was pushed the first time we started using coroutines in your view models. Before view model was removing all the coroutines, taking all the coroutines and removing the jobs with coroutine scope. We ended up doing a job, and this job, all your flows now are attaching to that flow. So this is going to be something really similar, except that it's going to happen in your activity or maybe in your fragment. You are going to have to create a job in the part of here, and every time you want to do a collection of your SharedFlow or your Stateflow, you ended up doing an attachment to this job, right? So every time you start doing it, you have to do it. And when the view is getting removed, maybe you are going on a stop, you need to cancel this job. And And this is a lot of boilerplate. Imagine if you have like 20 flows in just one view, this is going to look ridiculous. It's going to be an incredible amount of variables and a lot of immutability that is going to happen in here. So we need to make this a better solution, right? This doesn't work. It makes no sense. So this is actually, I just want to say that this is actually the documentation that has on Android. It doesn't mean it's correct. you can use it, but it doesn't mean it's correct. There's something that they decide to do to make sure that this is better. And what we really need is make sure that these collectors are ready for when the activity or the fragment is getting launched and is running. So we need to make sure that in this specific stage, that are the stages that our user is consuming, our collectors are ready to do it, that are ready to push the view and make sure that everything is correct. And it needs to make sure that all our collectors are getting canceled when the stage is no longer active, when the fragment is going on pause, maybe when the fragment is getting destroyed. If we can do that, we can make sure that the SharedFlow and Stateflow are safe to start collecting on our activities and in our fragments, okay? So we need also a policy of relaunch and auto cancellation. It needs to be automatic. So it's on alpha. They already did it on Google. It's a good library. We are using it on the office and it's working. It's cool. It's doing it. It's doing the job. And you probably are already using, so only you are using maybe an unstable version. These modifications belong to this library. It's just on the Lifecycle runtime KTX library. It's on alpha. I know it might be something difficult to use in some places, but it makes the tricks. I do promise it makes the tricks. Because what it does is that give you the chance to have a safe way of collecting your Stateflow and your SharedFlow without abusing your CPU, your memory, and probably your RAM. And has pretty much two functions. The first one is repeat on lifecycle, and the second one is flow with lifecycle. And we are going to see what is going on inside of these two functions. What is happening inside this function is that they give you the chance to repeat the collection in an automatic way, having all the benefits that you need for start using flows, SharedFlow and Stateflow, depending on the life cycle you want to start collecting. So imagine you have this function, private fonts and observables that you attach to the lifecycle scope and make the launch of this function. And now that you have this space of when you can run a coroutine or a flow, you ended up asking to repeat these collections in some specific state of your life cycle. So you ended up telling to the life cycle that every time your life cycle is on this state, this specific state, for example, this is lifecycle.state.started, you are going to start consuming and collecting this view model. So if you are doing this little function in a fragment, you're going to, and your fragment is on resume, you are going to start doing this collection. Once the fragment moves to on destroy or on pause, this collection will stop safely and without worrying about maybe leaking your Stateflows or your SharedFlows. This is quite important. But what is going on inside? What is under the hood? Let's see if they are different actually of the live data. Well, they are. The first thing is that they make sure that they are running in a specific state with a specific block of a coroutine scope, right? This is for this part of here. For the second part, of the for the first part of the function, you ended up having make a requirement that the lifecycle state is not initialized, because there is nothing in there of this. You can start a collection when it's only initializing. Is not that makes no sense. You need to start using on started or maybe on resume. That also makes sense. Make sure that you are not on the process of destroying, because these two specific states are states that only last a couple of seconds. It's just a matter of maybe a little bit. So you don't want to have to do any collection in these states. You ended up using the states that that are used by the user a little longer, right? What is going on after this check is that we start using the coroutine scope. We make sure this coroutine scope is running in some specific stage. We also do a double check of the destroyed. And once this is where things start getting interesting. There is also a job, the same job that we will see on the documentation of Google, except that is now moving in here. And it makes sure this observer belongs to a lifecycle event observer. So it's attached to the view, and it makes sure that it belongs to the tree of all the observers that we have. So if inside this scope that we have a try and a catch, well, a try and a finally, we make sure that this is a suspendable callable coroutine, so a coroutine. We make sure that this event is moving from a stage to the stage we want to make sure that our collection is going to happen. We make sure that we are gonna cancel this stage once this stage is moving from the other stage, okay? So pretty much we attach this observer, we make sure that everything is working in here, and we make sure that to remove it if it is destroyed. We make some cancellation if everything is going well. And this final line in here is pretty much something really similar that we have on the part of the live data. So this also made the trick, and it makes sense that now it's running on a suspend process, and it makes sense that it's attached to some specific stage when we need to start consuming and collecting our flows. This solves a lot of problems. It solves the problem with the memory. It solves the problem of automatic restarting and automatic cancellation. And also it's quite smart to make sure to not collect when you are moving from one fragment to another fragment. And it makes sure to remove it once the fragment is completely destroyed. So this is quite cool to solve the problem. And the final part is that if everything goes wrong and everything is crashed, it just cancel the launch observer and remove the observer of the code. So you ended up having something like this, a safe way to collect without making sure that, and you make sure that everything is going correctly, that you are respecting your life cycle state and your life cycle owner. For flow with life cycle, this is pretty much the same. You ended up asking for a little space of coroutine lifecycle scope of launch. This is a specific stage goes to your SharedFlow or your Stateflow, and you decide to start collecting with your using flow with lifecycle. You send your owner, that right now is the scope of your coroutine, the event when you want to start collecting this flow, and you can start collecting in a safe way exactly inside of here. What is the only difference? The only difference is that this is an experimental coroutine API, like mostly of a lot of things that is happening right now on Kotlin that are cool and new. And the only thing that is different is that you send a lifecycle in a stage, because you are gonna start using callback flow. Callback flow is a call flow. It's like a transformation of a state flow, a call flow, and make sure that to have a producer scope. It gives you a chance to move like a different context when you are running some specific part of your code. But pretty much goes to repeat on lifecycle, does the same, and just send the flows again and make sure to cancel, to close the callback flow, and it does the trick. This is really cool. It depends of your approach you want to start addressing. Remember, there is some details that you want to address when you are using Flow with Lifecycle. Make sure that you are using it correctly. There is a full documentation about this that was written by Manuel Vivo. And my last comment about this is that it's quite cool. Give it a try. I know it's an alpha, but you need to make sure that you are collecting your flows correctly and you are doing it with a lot of respect, because we don't want to have any problems. So make sure that you are using it quite cool. And lastly, it works with Compose. So you can start using this with Compose. You can use a lifecycle. You can start address your lifecycle with your composable functions, and make sure that you remember these flows adding to the life cycle, and you can start consuming it too, and it will update your code every time you collected them as a state. This is quite cool. You ended up having your function, your composable function, ready to make sure that everything is working on your life cycle and that your function is attached to a life cycle state. I haven't been able to give it a try to this specific part, but we are moving in the office to Compose, so I will let you know when it's ready. Maybe we will do another talk about this. And that's pretty much all. I hope you enjoyed this talk. If you have any questions, please let me stop sharing so I can see you.
It was a great presentation and too much of information. I was hoping there was a clapping app also.
Okay, let me see. Okay, there's a lot of questions. A lot of comments. Don't worry if you are using live data. It's quite cool. Live data works for a lot of things, and it makes sense if you are doing a save collection. Just make sure you are not, maybe it's not solving the problems you want to, maybe it does. So just make sure that everything is going well in there. So don't worry if you are using live data. It's cool. It's not bad. Live data is cool. Flow gang. Give it a try. Flows are quite cool, and you can start, if you want to give it a try, you can start moving just little by little. You don't need to make a lot of things, but it's quite cool.
Dinorah, sorry to interrupt, just a quick one. First of all, thank you very much for that. That was really, really interesting. I've got two questions, if I can cheekily ask two. In fact, I'll just jot them down. So my first question is, when we're doing the repeat on life cycle and you've specified something, for example, like resumed, right, the resumed state, does that coroutine get cleaned up when pause is hit or when stop is hit? Is there like, you know, the brackets, is it like resume and pause, and that's the sort of space it'll run in? And if you specified the repeat on life cycle from start, would that be from start to stop? Would that be the sort of time it lives?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. You explain it so well. It's only between these little gray space when it's executed. If you pick a little longer stage, it's gonna go like this, because you ended up having the part of the state and the events. So if you make sure you are picking the event, you are picking this little space, the gray area of the space.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for cleaning that up. And then the second one, the repeat on life cycle, where you specify like that life cycle sort of state or event. How does that differ to, I think I've seen somewhere there's like a launched when resumed or launched when started somewhere in, I'm not entirely sure where that is.
Coroutines. I think there are also on coroutines, and okay. I think everybody was using that for collecting the flows before this library came alive. The only problem with launch when created or launch when everything is going in there is that you are creating that for the main coroutine scope, not the consumption of not the consuming part of the flow. So you are just only creating this space of when your flow is going to run, but the running part is not lifecycle aware. So you are just launching the scope.
Okay, cool. Oh, thank you very much for that. Very, very interesting. If you've got any more like documentation to read up on there, I'd love to like grab it from you if that's possible.
Oh yes. There is a really cool blog post. I'm gonna put it on the chat. That is from Manuel Vivo, which is part of Google. He's amazing, and I think he's explaining it so well. So it's on Medium. It's on the Android developer blog, and he makes sure to he answered everything. So if you drop him a question, he will do his job and answer all the questions.
His job, I love it. Thank you so much.
He's on developer relationships or something like that. So
yeah, do your job, answer my questions. Let's go.
No, he's a really nice guy. So he always answers. If you ping him on Twitter, he will give you an answer. He's like really sweet person. So
cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. An awesome talk.
No, thank you. Okay, awesome. Okay.
There was one more question about the main objective of live data.
Well, the main objective of live data. Oh, that's a cool question. I think that's a question for from an interview. Well, I think the main objective of live data was that the main responsibility of it was to manage the passing of the view model data to the view. It was a way to do it and make sure it was pretty much a way to send the data and start doing the observation of the data. I don't know if that responds to your questions.
We can wait a bit for Raj to reply. And yes, it does. I would also have a question. So flows have those terminal collectors. I'm using this launch in LifecycleOwner, Lifecycle Scope. Does it mean that this is not safe to collect the flow?
I think you need to make sure that you are not pushing this data when you are moving from maybe one fragment to another fragment. Maybe you're, we'll need to review a little bit the code. If you are doing it in a proper way, you might not need the part of the flow cancellation that is on the documentation of Google, that you attach this collection to that job and make sure that this job is collected and destroyed. So you might want to give it a try. I will post the link in here in the chat too. I have it in my documentation. Just give me 1 second. Oh wow, what it is. And, yeah, but I think you need to make sure that if you start pushing data to that flow and you are moving from one fragment to another, this collection is not happening, or maybe it's not leaking. If you are moving maybe quite fast from one state to another, maybe answering a call or maybe moving one up from another, make sure that this collection is stopped and or retained and nor is getting pushed, because it might be safely collected, but might be consuming so much memory, and you will notice if you start doing it like quite fast from moving one application to another. So maybe give it a try. I don't know, but
get you. Thank you.
No, thanks to you.
Any other questions for Dinorah?
Yes. Hi, I have one question. Hi, it's John. You were saying about you are on the process of migrating to Flow, and I'm one of the guys that uses still live data.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not saying live data is grown.
Yeah, no, the thing is that
now I feel bad.
It's quite a long process to do this migration. Do you have, or do you plan to write about like this flow to live data or flow migration? Because I have no idea where to start. It's too much for me, like to get started tomorrow and say, oh, let's migrate to flow or something like that. So any tips for like kind of trying to do that?
You can start using this way of collection flows with still using live data. So we in the application we are working, we have some parts that are quite old that are still using live data, and we need to move to SharedFlow and Stateflow. My tip is that you can start from a little part and going from little smart details, maybe your splash screen, your login screen, things like that.
So they are like interoperable perfectly, right? So you can like you want to step at a time and so on, or
depending on what you are doing. I don't want to sound like all the other developers that say it depends, but it depends on what you are going to do it. But I think I'm gonna write a blog post about it. I've been giving this talk two times, and that it's a recurrent question. I will try to do it.
Thank you.
This week, and
really
I will push it.
I'll be waiting for it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the talk. We're really nice.
Thank you.
Okay, I would say we have time for one last question. And if not, just leave the questions maybe directly under the article that Dinorah would write. And I will come back to our presentation. Cool. So thanks everyone for joining. The next meetup will be at the end of October. We are also probably seeing each other at DroidCon. Once again, if you were interested in getting certain tickets, feel free to like screenshot it right now or reach out to Maria. Have a good evening and see you. And
thank you so much. I hope everybody has a nice day, and I hope you enjoyed Berlin DroidCon. I will not be able to join you this year because in Mexico we still have a lot of COVID cases, so it's quite difficult. But thank you so much for having me and for inviting me. I hope everybody has an incredible day.
Oh, it was awesome having you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye, everyone.